Dane and Derek is an uncensored, unfiltered podcast. You can find content warnings in the episode description. Thank you for listening. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Dane and Derek. Today we are back after probably, I don't know, it's been like at least over a month since the last we talked IRL, but since you're hearing this, it's been about a week.
Yep.
Because I've been behind on edits, and so now we're going to have a lot of closer episodes. So this is going to be an interesting last few episodes of the season. This is episode 20, and yeah, let me introduce my co-host as always, Dane. Who
Hi.
are you?
I'm doing. You asked how I was, right?
I asked who you are, but how you are also works.
You know, like Derek said, it's been a second. It's been a hot minute. Anyways, I'm Dane. I am a writer. I am a law student. I am a lover of music, tabletop RPGs, video games, movies, art in general, life, people. I don't know. That stuff.
Yeah.
That's me.
Yeah, that's you.
Yeah.
That's you in a nutshell.
Yeah. And who are you, Derek?
Yeah. Wow, I didn't even introduce myself. My name is Derek, Derek, in case people were wondering. And I'm a film person, lover of life, lover of tabletop RPGs.
Surfer sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. I've been learning how to golf. But I don't consider myself good at golf.
It's so hard to be the skill threshold to be acceptable at golf is so high, relatively speaking. You know, like there's some like sports. Like most sports have like a threshold to be considered good if you're going up against like pros or whatever. But for like amateur athletes, like your hobbyist athletes, there's some sports that like there's a low threshold to where you can be like, I can play and I can play fine. In badminton, it's pretty easy to get that volley going, but golf is fucking infuriating.
It's something else.
It's like, wild. Anyways,
it's very satisfying, but very rough. Maybe one of these episodes we should attempt a sport. Like next time you're in LA, maybe we should go to a surf class.
Oh, that would be awesome. I haven't even attempted such a thing since high school, so I would be up for that, no doubt.
Yeah, we're definitely in the winter season though, so unless you're catching big waves, you're not gonna see me at the beach. I'll take my sub 4 feet, thank you. Anyway, it's fun. Ironically enough, sports is not the topic of today's episode.
No.
Today's one of your topics, Dane.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead and introduce it.
Well, all right. So we're talking about starting campaigns today. We're back on our shit. We're back on our D&D shit. Our tabletop RPG shit. It's nice for us. But there's a couple reasons I suggested this. One, we haven't really talked about it. Two, I think on average, people will start more campaigns than they will properly play, and definitely more than they will finish.
Yeah, that's a fair statistic that we don't need to do any research on.
No, I don't think there's a single peer-reviewed study of such a thing, and I am 100% confident in what I just said.
Yeah,
100%.
No, I completely agree. And if people want to fact check us, go for it.
Ask any dungeon master, literally, like
anyone.
Like if somebody has like even I would say like a batting 500, like a 50% complete rate on campaigns, I want to hear from that person because I want their secret. And so the long and short of it is I think that there's a lot to it. I'd love to talk about ending campaigns someday, too, because I think it's so much less common. It's really tricky and really tough.
Yeah.
And it's
difficult.
It is really difficult. But I really want to talk about it because you do it so much, really, I think, relatively speaking. And I think it's exciting. I think it's really fun. I'm also in the midst of starting a campaign. I took a quick break between what I was doing before I started recording and recording to do dinner. But right now, my computer is stacked up on top of all of my 5th edition books that have monsters in them. Partially because that lets me see the computer while I stand, and partially because I was going through and picking out monsters for the campaign setting I'm creating. I am right in the
Oh,
middle of
two
it, literally.
things. Two things that Dane likes: picking out monsters in D&D campaigns and standing during recording.
2 things I
Um,
like.
yeah, two things you like. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good topic to discuss starting campaigns because it is hard, especially for new DMs. You know, I have a coworker who just for the first time DM'd and for the first time had to wrangle a campaign and a group together
Mm-hmm.
and an adventure together, and now it's looking like they're gonna get a second adventure, um, and they're working towards that second adventure, and it's very interesting. And as someone who's definitely started more campaigns than I've finished, I've maybe only finished four, but one of those was a one shot split up over 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
The
That
other was
counts.
a
That
okay,
100% counts.
okay, and the other one I don't like counting it because I didn't like how it ended. But that it
Mm.
does count, unfortunately. And I think that's the thing. Out of the four, I've only maybe had I've been lucky in that the very first campaign the very first campaign I finished had a really good ending, and the most recent campaign I've finished had a good ending.
Mm.
I'm in a nice sandwich there where I'm I don't know if I want to start another game. Um, with for fear of not being able to finish and take it across the finish line, because I have done several starts and fits since that most recent ended campaign, and I haven't had the opportunity to finish those for whether it's just things didn't work out or my capacity changed or we lost momentum or for whatever reason. And yeah, I think it's interesting. Yeah, like there will be definitely more adventures started.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, like I guess, now that you're preparing stuff, you said you're picking monsters.
Yes.
I guess let's specifically talk about this perhaps from the dungeon master standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, yeah, because I think like it's very rare that a player will be like, "Oh, I found a DM," um, and I'm putting together the game and bringing in my friend who DMs to DM it for me with everyone. Like it's very rare that that happens. So from a DM's perspective,
Mm-hmm.
give me the lowdown on how you begin a campaign, or at least how you prepare for that. Everything leading up to that first session.
Yeah. Okay. Before I say that, I was also in the background counting all the campaigns I've finished in my life.
Mm.
It's 13. Um,
Whew.
to you and I was like, oh shit, that's a lot actually. But it doesn't sound like a lot. Was what I was thinking.
Well, yeah, because you probably started like 40 games.
Probably something like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
13. Like
Yeah.
13 over, closing on 20 years of playing, right? So
Yeah.
it sounds like not a lot. Um,
Yeah.
but it is actually kind of a lot. Anyways, so but to actually answer your question, to go back to talking about starting your campaign, I think that there's a lot of ways you can do it. And I've done it a number of ways myself. Um, Sometimes I will sit down and I will how should I explain this? It depends on a level of prep is the difference.
Hmm.
Sometimes I will sit down with a campaign and basically everything will be ready. I roughly know, like, it's basically like I've sat there and I have written one of the like 5th edition pre-published campaign books.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and it's usually a hell of a lot shorter, but it's like that. On the other end, it's usually like I've never actually started a campaign, like purposefully started a campaign, wherein I didn't have at bare minimum a map with a bunch of like fucking icons on it, like a bunch of like places for players to go, and to do, with some like pre-made NPCs and some vague thoughts about like the cosmology and like what lives here and what's going on. And like every little icon, if you go there, I'm more or less fully prepped to just like, if you want to just hang out there this whole session, that's fine. That is like where my bare minimum lies, basically. And then everything else is kind of in between for me. And I've had success doing it all. So I'm sure that second one you're really familiar with, because that's how we started the Lich campaign, the evil characters campaign back in high school. Is I slapped down a map in front of you all, and I remember this very distinctly. And this is one of the reasons I often do this, because there's a lot of if you're with the right players, there's a lot going on there that's super exciting. Because like you slap the map down and you say, as long as it's here and here, you guys go where you want. You know, like that's exciting for players. On the other end of the spectrum, there was a game I ran called Shadowlight, and for a lot of reasons, I basically was like, okay, listen, what we're gonna do is we are gonna run a bunch of interconnected heists, all leading up to kind of like a big moment. And it's all going to take place in this one city. And basically, I knew everything. I knew what adventures were coming. I knew every NPCs that they could realistically run into. And then I had a random table for generating a city NPC based on the district of the city they were in and whatever. And that was basically like a pre-made adventure. Like I walked them through it. It's not that their choices didn't matter. It's just that it was more like playing Dragon Age, so to speak, where it's like, you can like, you go through the outcomes like along the way, you know, but like spoilers, Hawk's mother always dies. Sorry. You know, like it's that kind of thing. But like how it turns out with like the Templars and all of this stuff, who knows? That's up to you. So it was a lot more like that. And usually I'm somewhere in the middle. With the map thing, usually that's when I'm in a mood to kind of like leave a lot up to the players. And when that happens, it usually leads to a campaign that I find to be, from a world building perspective, a little inconsistent, but usually a lot of fun. Though it does require a lot of player investment. So if your players are not the one, if your players are the ones who look at a blank page and get kind of anxious, I wouldn't super recommend that. And so usually what I do is I make sure to have a couple of things for the first session. I make sure to have like a home base, you know, at its most simple. It's a village with a tavern. You know how it goes. And that there's a dungeon nearby, and there's like interesting things on the map. That is the basics. That like if you have that, you have the beginnings of a campaign. If you have some vague ideas about like gods and goddesses and you know vaguely what monsters are around, like you're good. That's all I think you need. Because I'm very focused around like get playing. You know, like you don't need to know everything. Sometimes though, it's really fun to know a lot more. And sometimes it's really fun for players to have a good understanding of the world, you know? Like for example, I well, what's a good example? Like to if someone has like a ton of lore built up in their head about something already, they can like play off of it, right? Like for example, let's say we were playing kind of like an Edge of the Empire Star Wars game. Because I know about Order 66, I could play an Order 66 Survivor Jedi, right? You can play on stuff. And so like sometimes it's fun to do that. And also for you as the GM, sometimes that's really fun. And also if you want to create a particular flavor of certain things, it's really good to go in beforehand and make some changes based around that. So in this new campaign, for example, There aren't any dragons, there aren't any fiends, there aren't any celestials, for example, flat out. They just don't exist. And also, I really cut back on the amount of undead, basically just enough to leave in enough that like necromantic spells would all still work, so to speak. And but beyond that, that's it.
Okay, that's a
And
pretty solid process.
yeah, and I can go into it a little bit more for sure. But what about you? Where's your head at usually?
So, I mean, I think the thing that like something I realized we also probably should have talked about a little bit was like before starting a campaign, you have to like, Mission Impossible style from like the 60s TV show, pick your team, pick your players.
For sure.
And like, sometimes let's be real, like sometimes you're playing with folks that you either really want to play with, sometimes you're playing with folks that they just were kind of there. Sometimes you're playing with folks you've never played with before and you're freaking out on what kind of a player they are. And sometimes you don't really like the person that you have to play with and you gotta either tell them step away or nah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like, in this ideal scenario, right, like that we're talking about, it's like you have a group of people that really want to play whatever game you want to make.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like to that end, I often start with a broad, like one sentence about the world. I make like a little one sheet where like I talk a little bit about the world, what's kind of in it, and then I usually will use some comps, like some comparisons. I'll find some movies or some media, and I'll just like send that to players. And then based on
Mm-hmm.
what they send me back from characters, I'll devise what we're going to be doing for the bulk of the story. Um, I have done the map technique where it's one map sheet at a time, but I've never just done it where like I've showed up to the game with just the map and not knowing the players too
Mm-hmm.
well as their characters. I've almost always taken into heavy consideration the characters in the game and building them into the world, which is perhaps probably why I don't DM as often and why I don't finish as many games, because it's super taxing on the game
Totally.
master to kind
Totally
of
that style. Yeah.
do that much work. It is like writing. It's what I imagine writing a novel feels like, except you're writing a novel with like five other people.
And
um,
and also on top of that, if someone's dice go fucking wonky, then the novel also has to go wonky with it.
exactly, and I think that method of DMing, I think that I've been doing, it's arguably not the best, but I think it's the one that I have sort of developed over a while. I found that I'm particularly better at adapting things. Like the most recent game I finished was a Masks game.
Mm-hmm.
And basically I said like, hey, look, like it's our first time playing this system. Let's just have the setting be like future Los Angeles, an alternative Los Angeles. Because
Yeah.
we all live in Los Angeles, we can reference things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we didn't have a map until like the third volume of comics or adventures, really.
Mm-hmm.
I mostly just had like the characters and then like a vague cast of NPCs. And I kind of ran with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think what made that interesting was one of the players picked the Doomed, which famously has a trait that once all of your like doom markers are checked, your doom consumes you and your character dies. And this player was really adamant about that happening, and so the whole game became built around that experience,
Yeah.
which was,
Yeah.
it was one of the things where this game could have gone on a long time, but I think having that cap, we played like 20 sessions over the course of like a year, and it almost all stemmed from that one player's decision, as well as some changes to the cast of characters. One player had to step away, another person came in and to join, and that kind of changed the dynamic and it kind of pivoted like the story a bit. Um, and so I think like, yeah, like my strategy is very player focused versus like world focused. I think instead of building a set for action figures to be placed in and to do cool things in, I am taking the action figures and I am building, or I'm not even building like a set around it. I'm instead like I'm sewing a tapestry very
Yeah.
carefully and trying not to mess up. So
Totally.
yeah, I think that's kind of where I'd come at it. Very different approach. I
I
don't. Yeah.
Oh,
Eh,
no. I think that
go ahead.
I think that's a really fantastic approach, um, for sure, because,
Yeah, it's a different
um
style, and I think like perhaps that is like the other point about talking about the ways that we start a campaign because everyone's gonna have to find what way makes the most sense for them to plan.
absolutely, and, like, it's important to think about your like, you I really appreciate you bringing up this stuff about, like, you gotta figure out your players, you gotta, like, all of that's super important too, and I will say, I have run complete campaigns a lot like yours. If you wanna hear them, they're over on Diceology.
Yeah, there you
And
go, Diceology plug, baby.
yep, they tend to make for extremely good performance shows
Yeah.
more than what I like to do in my day-to-day sort of campaign. What I like to do in my day-to-day campaign, I think leads to more meaningful moments for the players, but the game itself is not that fun looking in from the outside.
Yeah.
Is something that I think is important to think about. And also, like, I've kind of come around to trying to play the game that the systems want you to play to some extent.
Yes,
So
we've
like if
talked
I'm
about this before.
yeah, so like if I'm playing Fall of Magic or even something like Dungeon World or Masks, I will suddenly become so much more interested in the characters
Mhm.
before I do any sort of world building because there are some assumptions baked into the characters and there are some assumptions baked in to the mechanics, right? In Masks, I think explicitly characters probably don't die. That's not to say
Yeah,
there aren't consequences, but the genre that's being told is like Teen Titans comic
exactly.
stories, and generally speaking, characters don't die. I think
Right.
I have Masks and I read it, and like the doomed, it doesn't even have to be death. Like I think Raven
Yeah.
is like a really good example where her
Mhm.
doom is her evil demon father showing up for realsies. You know,
Yeah.
like it doesn't have to be that
Yeah.
even it can be and
It can be,
but
yeah,
it
and I
doesn't
think
even have to be that, you know.
right, but that's like the only example in which it can be in that game. Like there's no hit points, characters don't take wounds. It's not like D&D where there's a bit of that number crunch and that like resource management that it
Right.
asks you to do. Same with
Yeah.
like, Lancer versus Mecha Hack are two very different mech games.
Mhm.
Um, Dungeons and Dragons versus, Dungeon World are two different D&D games
They
or fantasy
super
games.
are. They super are. And
And yeah, and I think that's also a really good point. Like knowing the game you're going to play for your campaign and like leaning into what the game asks you to do, asks of you as a player is
mhm.
important.
Yeah, and I'm also in the OSR style of play even with 5e like I and like you said with players, for this campaign I had considered, I considered old school essentials. I considered all kinds of true OSR games, OSR hacks, all of that. But I couldn't get my players on board with it. I would show them stuff, and a couple of them would be, "Oh, this is rad," and then they would look at the sparseness of the classes, and I could see the disappointment on their faces.
Yeah.
And the reason behind that is at this point we are very used to as gamers, just period, like video gamers, all of it, having a plethora of choices for
Mhm.
self-expression.
Yeah.
And so it feels like we're used to having Photoshop and digital cameras and film cameras in color and in black and white. We have all these choices. And what I'm saying is like, hey, let's just do black and white photography. And like
Yeah.
a few people will be super into that with me, but not everybody.
Yeah.
And what I'm more asking is like, hey, um, everyone has to start with film photography, but you can scan in your photos and we can Photoshop and do all the digital and all of that from there.
Right.
Is
Yeah.
kind of what I'm pitching via my like hacks into 5e.
Yeah. And
Um,
and that's a part. Yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
and to
Sorry.
to go on, like I literally can't even do the method of character focused game and world building Because my method of character generation is people roll their characters at the table with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't do any prep work
Yeah.
that involves knowing what their characters are until they sit down and roll with me at the first session. And after that, I'm so happy to like introduce characters who are related to their characters and all of this stuff. But I need to make them a platform. I need to give them a stage. So that when they roll up a set of stats that they don't know what to do with, they're like, I did not come here thinking I was going to play a druid, but now I am. Can you tell me anything about druids? Because I don't have any ideas, you know?
Yeah.
And so I need to know what it is and why and all that good stuff. And so, like you said, it's all about that style of play.
Mm-hmm.
Um, But I have a question. Do you have any
Yes.
favorite parts of campaign creation? Because I do, for sure. There's
I
some
mean,
things I love way more than others.
um, I can tell you my least favorite parts.
That's good too.
I think it's like for me, my least favorite parts are like anything that has to do with like city building. I really don't like city building. I don't like
Mm-hmm.
figuring out any of the politics of the world. I don't like figuring
Mm-hmm.
out um I don't even like enjoy the outside of drawing the map, I don't enjoy thinking about what's in there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like thinking about all the businesses, all the whatever's. I don't like thinking too far into the structure of the world and how the world works.
Mm-hmm.
Um I'm also not the I also don't really enjoy figuring out what monsters I'm going to use. Which I think is just because I have a default that I'm comfortable with.
Yeah.
And I don't really change it, and people know to expect that if there's a D&D campaign Derek's running, we're probably going to fight a dragon. Like,
Mm-hmm.
people have accepted that as part of like the DMing stuff I do.
I have the same
Um,
thing about undead and cults. Everybody knows
yeah,
that you're gonna run into one of those, if not both, for me.
exactly. And like, I think like the other least favorite thing I don't like doing is like, um, no, I guess it's really just like the nitty-gritty city planning. I think it stems from a weakness of not being able to DM too well in a cityscape, in a
Mm-hmm.
medieval city. Like I
It's
really
tough.
thrive. Yeah, it's tough. There's so many layers to a city, so many people. Like when it's a sparsely populated world or a desolate dungeon with just monsters, it's a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoy that a lot more. Um, and I think I think I enjoy my favorite part of the process probably is going on Pinterest and finding images from artists and like collecting those and like packaging it into like a mood board
Yep.
for my players.
I, I,
That's
I fucking
yeah.
love that too. That's super
Yeah.
fun.
That's definitely up there. Sometimes I'll make a playlist.
Yep.
And
Yep.
then occasionally I'll do research. Like I'll watch a bunch of sword and sorcery movies to prep.
Mm.
So it's like that kind of stuff I like. I also really enjoy like writing broad strokes history. I think the common thing I feel about running a game is I really don't enjoy creating lore. Um,
Hmm.
Perhaps that is what it all goes back to. I don't like creating lore. I don't want to create lore and then be locked into it.
Yeah,
I'd rather play a bit of Calvin Ball with my players.
definitely.
Um, and so the less lore I have to create at the start, the better. Um, but yeah, what about you?
Least favorite thing is actually doing sort of nitty gritty things. Like the fucking thing I hate the worst is a lot like that, where I'm like, okay, what am I going to name this in? What am I going to name this fucking in? Like I don't love doing that very much.
Mm,
Um, I do love getting nitty gritty with things like dungeons though, just because I really enjoy being in those spaces. I enjoy getting nitty gritty with NPCs sometimes.
hmm
I do like lore though, and I have a really broad definition of lore because lore for me goes all the way from like what happened in this to make the world the way it is, like to like are there gods or not? Do the gods how close are the gods to the universe, right? Like
hmm
um and but it also goes all the way down to some mechanical choices that I'll make. Like, so for this campaign I'm running right now, there are only going to be 4 lineages available to players, which is basically human, dwarves, kenku, and they're not tieflings, but they are tieflings. They look like tieflings, but they're not fiendish. And there's a reason why I picked each one, and there's some variations on them that I put into place. Like, for example, in this world, dwarves work like bees,
Oh.
where there's a queen, and then there's a bunch of AMAB people. Like, it's like 97, 98 to 1 or 2 in terms of AFAB to AMAB.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just really influences their culture. They're hyper matriarchal, but also sort of repressive in some ways. And then by contrast, the tieflings, which I'm just calling horned daughters, are all AFAB. They're all born and would be gendered as women. And that's not to say that there aren't trans people in the world. There super are, for me. But like, but the reason for that is, and spoilers, I hope none of my players are listening to this show right now, actually, is that long ago there were also elves, but they were all sort of killed off except for this last enclave of like female sorceress elves, who basically like sent their souls off to be like reincarnated in like the human lineage, creating these like horned women instead. And so they're constantly being reincarnated, so they're always basically the same person. And then like the Kenku I picked because they used to be homunculi created by human wizards, and so the Kenku have a lot of distrust of arcane magic, and to some extent like human wizards. Like, that's like a very scary thing for, they don't like that. And that was like literally only like 300 years ago that happened, that they stopped being homunculi and started being their own set of beings. And so like that's super fun for me. I love doing that. Like, that's cool to me to get to put together that much detail, in the same way, like I know all the gods and I assign different like cleric domains to different gods. And so there's a fun in that for me, in which like I like creating like a holistic world that I can offer to my players for them to step into, as opposed to sometimes I kind of like opening up a blank canvas that I've made a couple of vague outlines on, and we all get to like throw all the paint on together. Now, what happens next for me in this like kind of detailed lore stuff, like so much of what I do is just setup, like it's all context stuff. Like, I don't like putting in like, I don't know a lot about like what are dwarven clans like now. I don't really know that. I just want there to be enough context for like my players to work with. Like, I want to put out a bunch of paints this time, right? Lots of colors for them to work with, so that they don't have to bring their own, so to speak. And it's fun for me. And like that comes down to like monster choice. Like I was like, let's limit my undead and demon choices so that I will steer away from cults and fiends and undead for a little bit. And like, what sort of gigantic monsters are in the monster manual that I never use, because I will, if I want one of those, I default to dragon, right? Stuff like that. So like it's fun. It's fun for me in that way. I love doing that stuff. And also, I'm super with you. I always make a playlist. I always make a Pinterest board. Always.
Yeah. Like, I think if I could get to a place where starting a campaign was as simple as showing up with a map and like a little book of like notes to reference and then see what people come up with, kind of like take a page out of your book. Man, it would make, I think it would take so much pressure off of the game, I think. And maybe that's like another thing to talk about is like, I've been seeing a lot of folks talk about the DM crisis. And I don't know I haven't done too much digging into it. This probably could be a separate episode. But
Yeah, my understanding of the DM crisis is there's 2 problems. One, with the advent of the Matt Mercers and all of that, there's a lot more pressure on a GM.
Yeah.
And a lot more pressure to provide a particular sort of game, one in which it feels like a produced show where really what's happening is everybody's taking turns being in the absolute spotlight where a borderline scripted thing happens. I kind of call them backstory shows or backstory campaigns, where what we're really doing is we're taking turns having people's backstories come kick them in the ass.
Uh-huh.
And that's awesome. I've played in those. I've run those. They can be really fun. Nothing
Yeah.
against that. High pressure on the GM. Huge
Yeah.
pressure. And a lot of disappointment. And it's also tricky because it also requires other players to kind of wait their turn all the time.
Yeah.
What I constantly tell my players is don't go like give me like write a backstory, write as much as you want, but remember this. We're playing the adventure. The more interesting things are going to happen in the game together, right?
Yeah.
Like, and also think about levels 1 through 3 kind of as your actual backstory.
Yeah.
You know, your backstory is
Yeah.
just what you were doing until you actually decided to be a main character. Also, I play with a significant amount of character death. There's no guarantee you're going to make it past level 1. Sorry.
Yeah.
But that's also
Yeah.
some OSR possibilities. The other problem, in my opinion, is there is a crushing weight of info at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
To be a GM is to be very hard from a pure mechanical standpoint. There's a lot of pressure for a GM to be an expert in the game, and there's a lot of rules, and there's a lot of content, right? Like,
yeah.
fucking, I love Warlock as a class, and last session, my player pulled out a thing that I didn't know about. That when I went back and looked at it, I was like, wow, I can't believe I've never taken this invocation before. I cannot believe it. I would take this invocation every fucking time, but I didn't even know about it. I didn't even know about it.
Yeah.
And part of that has to do with the fact that I don't get to play that often. I'm almost always the dungeon master. And I think that there's a lot of crisis because it's really hard to be versed enough. And then on top of that, confident enough that if you get in that situation where, because I want to say that player used the invocation a little wrong, not completely wrong, but a little wrong. And
Yeah.
so to be confident enough that like, that character actually ended up dying, so I don't have to worry about it. But if they hadn't and they came back and they used it again, I would be like, listen, I looked that up. It's awesome. Here's how you properly use it. That would be fine. And also keeping the game running and not needing to stop and go through, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a high task, and you know, like I think that it's a particular skill set that not everybody has going into it. And I think anybody can learn it. Anybody can be a very good GM. I know we're running out of time on this episode, but I just want to give one piece of advice to like potential GMs out there.
Yeah.
You are 100% within your rights to just say, listen, this is my first time. We're just running what's in the player's handbook right now. Please. Like,
yeah.
I know there's other stuff out there, but we're just doing this, or we're just doing the player's handbook and the dragon Fizzband's dragon book because that's super neat, and we all want to do dragons, and they're going to be dragons in the campaign, so that's great.
Yeah.
It's okay to put restrictions down, so long as your players know up front, because that's a thing. That's a thing I do often. In this campaign I'm running right now, like, I basically am saying these are the subclasses. There are no dragons and fiends, and celestials, so that kicked out a lot of subclasses, or giants even, so that kicked out a few too. So I was like, these don't exist because there are no dragons. Sorry. But also that's easier for me to, because I'm like, I know all of the options. Nobody's going to come to me with the fucking Echo Knight. And I'm like, what is that? I actually know what that is, but like, and I actually am including it in this campaign, but like that's a more obscure one than say like the Battle Master, right?
Yeah.
So I would just advise people like it's okay to put on restrictions. And I would also just like particularly say like a really easy one is just saying we're just going vanilla. Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, Dungeon Master's Guide. If it's not in there, we're not playing it right now.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, that's how I prefer to roll. And I guess maybe we can do a part 2 of this, Dane, after you've started this next campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And like you can give like the things you've learned or like feedback from this campaign that you are in the process of preparing for and starting.
Yeah.
I think that'd be really cool.
Maybe we'll do a third one too, because I'm also in the process of finishing a campaign.
Oh yes, we'll definitely have to talk about ending games, because that is. I mean, we've talked about endings on this show, but not ending a game.
Mm-hmm. It's hard. It's hard to pull off, and it's rare that you get there in the first place. So
yeah,
Well,
good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of ending, we're out of time.
We were out of time 10 minutes ago, as per usual.
It's okay. It's been a minute. But yeah, thanks everyone for listening to this week's episode. Expect more from us as we come into the end of the year.
Mm-hmm. We are going to make our 26 episode goal. We are going to do it.
We are going to do it. Dane has been saying it, and we're going to do it.
Come hell or high water. If we have to release 2 episodes one week, we might. I don't know.
Yeah, I hope we don't.
I really hope we don't for Derek's
sake. But because we've had to do that, I think the last 2 seasons.
Something like that.
So I hope we don't this time. But yeah, you can follow the show everywhere at Dane and Derek. We don't really post, but sometimes we do. And you can go to my website, benigfilms.com. I just updated my portfolio. It's got a bunch of stuff I've done, and it's also got a bunch of stuff Dane's in.
That's true.
And that Dane helped produce. So go take a look at that. Dane, where can the good folks listening in find you?
You can go to danewrites.com. That's DANE and then WRITES.com. And there you'll find links out to what limited social media I have. And my Substack, which I haven't updated in a really long time. But there's examples of my writing there. There's links out to the other podcasts I've done, which actually one is I probably need to take down because it's just out to nothing now because we bundled them all together into just Diceology. So I would recommend going there if you want to hear me start some campaigns and finish a few.
Yeah.
And even pick one up from another player who was the GM, and then we swapped halfway through, which was also a wild experience because I felt like I was starting a campaign in a completely different way. Anyways, another time.
Another tale for another time.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yes, thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Out here on the sand, not far from land. Sure, I'm warm, but I wish I was cold with you. Out here on the sand, not far from land. Sure, I'm warm, but I wish I was cold.